Thank you for joining us. This is a deep dive for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. And again, my name is Jim Richardson, the CEO and founder of Finchley. So let's begin with our presentation. Just quickly, a little bit about us for those of you who haven't met us before. We're a 100% Microsoft Cloud partner. We have 35 employees across the US, and we're a direct CSP. We have professional and managed services to support our customers, and we specialize in the three Microsoft areas of the modern workplace, security, and Azure infrastructure. And some of our specialties are around big complex projects like mergers and acquisitions, Microsoft security projects, and full migrations and transformations. And we've been around almost 10 years, so it's great to say since 2013. Now, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is part of the Microsoft 365 Defender suite. You can see in the black chart here, I put the four most common apps that are in the Defender suite. There's Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, and Defender for Cloud Apps. Today, we're just going to be talking about Defender for Endpoint. And for Endpoint, there's two different offerings. For businesses under 300 employees, there's Microsoft Defender for Business. And that's sort of an all-in-one pre-configured solution that's easy to deploy for smaller businesses using some common general settings. And for enterprises, there's Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which now comes in two flavors, Plan 1 and Plan 2. And in our first webinar last month, we talked about Plan 1 and some of the features you would get. Today, I'm here to specifically talk about what you get over and above in Plan 2. Now, these SKUs, Plan 1 and Plan 2, are available now. They're included in some of the subscriptions that you might already have today. So, for example, Plan 2 that we're going to be talking about today, you can buy it as an add-on for $5.20 per user per month based on annual term pricing. Or if you already own Microsoft 365 E5 or E5 Security, it's included in that. So you may already have the product. Some of those additional features that we were talking about in Plan 2 are EDR, which is Endpoint Detection and Response. And we're going to drill into some of these as we go into a demo. There's automated investigation and remediation, threat and vulnerability management. And with threat and vulnerability management, it scans your apps, your data, your endpoints, your servers, and it looks for vulnerabilities before they get breached. And it gives you the report and the intelligence to work on those, whether it be patching or upgrades. So that's a good one. Threat intelligence gives you information based on what's out in the wild and your risk and vulnerability to those threats. And both Plan 1 and Plan 2 support PC and server, Windows Server, Mac, Linux, Android, and iOS. So you can have a full range of protection on your endpoints here. And then the last thing I didn't point out is down at the bottom of the comparison chart. Microsoft Threat Experts is a pay-per-use service, the managed service where you could hire Microsoft as part of your security operations center to be your threat hunters. And they can also be hired to respond to advanced or severe incidents that you might discover. So with that, I wanted to jump quickly into the demo because we've only got a half an hour and I think our demo is about 20 minutes long. So if you can focus on the picture here, I'm going to tell you a little story about Carla, who's in our sales department. And this is a fictitious company. And Carla in the sales department received and then opened a spear phishing email that had a weaponized document from someone who was impersonating a coworker. I get an email from a coworker, usually I think it's safe, right? But this document contained a malicious macro that executed a PowerShell script and ran the Mimikatz exploit tool. It then farmed Carla's credentials on her workstation and allowed the attacker to gain access to the network. The attacker found services running with domain admin credentials on Carla's workstation. And yes, I realize some of the things in this scenario are no-nos that hopefully you all have fixed already. But let's face it, sometimes there's things that aren't fixed and they fall through the cracks. And this is where Defender can help. So with those domain admin credentials, then the attacker performed lateral movement to gain the domain administrator Pedro's credentials. From there, the attacker was able to perform DC sync to get the ADFS service account. The attacker was then able to move laterally against the ADFS server. Now, I've been saying for years, get rid of your ADFS server and migrate those credentials to Azure. But some of you may still have ADFS server. So now the attacker with these credentials can steal the ADFS token, the signing certificate itself, and create a new one and re-inject it as an impersonated privileged user. And they can eventually generate a new SAML token impersonating this privileged user and gain access to the Microsoft Graph API. And with this new access token, the attacker grants delegated mail read and write permissions to their own Azure AD application. And this allows the app now to log in and read email on behalf of the impersonated user. And that means all email in the company. And that's a really, really bad thing. So in this storyline, we've set up a demo environment and already simulated this attack. So what I want to do is switch over and show you what advantages you have as an administrator with Microsoft Defender as your tool set. And we're going to walk through the admin console to review how it captured and detected that incident in our fake company. So first, we're here on the Microsoft 365 Defender page, security.microsoft.com. And I'm going to click on the incidents page that shows us all of the recent incidents. Now from here, I'll go into the demo that we ran. And first, let's look at this summary tab. This summary tab is where the security operations team gets an overview, which will help the engineering team make informed triage decisions. Because when you try to piece all the individual alerts together to gain insight into an attack, it can be challenging and time consuming. So Microsoft Defender automatically aggregates all the alerts and their associated information into a single incident. And it tracks progress on remediating the threat and restoring the assets to a healthy and secure state. So first, let's look at this little bar chart here. This shows you the indication of progression against the MITRE attack tactics framework. And this shows you how far along they've progressed along the different areas of attack. And you can kind of see a number of active alerts. It's good that there's only 0. In this incident, we've already resolved them, so I'm going to show you history. And then you can drill down into each of these to see the individual alerts that fall into those categories. So also you can see the scope of the attack. So how widespread was this? There was 2 impacted devices, 5 impacted users, and 1 mailbox that was impacted. And it lists those all out here. And then a little further down, you'll see evidence. Evidence is the information that the tool collected and put together to show that this incident was related. Now you can drill down and see all the entities, and we'll look at those in just a second. But first, let's review the different alerts. And on this alert page, you'll be able to queue all the alerts related to the incident and other information that will help you prioritize the investigation. So some of the important things are the severity of the alert, and this is designated by Defender and the integrated security components. You can look at the impacted entities, so this shows you the workstations or the users who were impacted. The detection source, and it shows you which source this came from. So if you're using only Defender for Endpoint, it would only show you detections made by Endpoint. If you use some of the other Defender tools I showed you in the suite, like Office 365, Defender for Identity, you'd show those alerts too, and they would also aggregate to the incident. And these are all linked together. So as we're evaluating this incident, we can see different sources surfaced alerts for this. And the attack started with potentially a malicious URL click that we detected. And then we could review the attack chain from there. But before we go into specifics of the attack, let's quickly look at some of the additional tabs available so you can see how this will assist you in your investigation. So over here is the Devices tab. All the devices that have been identified to be part or related to the incident are listed here. The users impacted are listed here, as well as any service accounts or impersonated credentials, right? It's not just human being accounts. It looks at other accounts that might be compromised. And then finally, mailboxes shows us the specific mailbox that was a part of this attack. Investigations over here is part of Plan 2, where you can see all the automated investigations that were triggered by the alerts. So some of these alerts automatically trigger investigations and remediation. So you can see here, this little icon indicates automation, and that's what you get in Plan 2. And it shows whether it was automatically remediated or not. And then lastly, the evidence and response page shows you all the collected evidence, including which services were detected on the workstation, fingerprints in the email, and so on and so forth. So now let's dive into the alerts tab so that we can see how we can use this to chronologically investigate. So back, if you remember the alert story, we talked about a user that clicked on a URL. So what I want to do is look at that. And we can get more information about what happened here. First of all, I like how they title this, What Happened? And it shows you the timeline of when this occurred. You can also read some intelligence that Microsoft provides you with, and it might be helpful in your investigation. Then it shows the collected information about the executable running on the computer, potential lateral movement, and here is the link that the user had clicked. When I click on this piece of information, it shows me the actual detail of the URL. And if I'm on a secure box that's used for threat hunting, I could potentially open the URL. So that's some details about the URL itself and the timeline that was involved. Let me go back a little bit. And let's look on the summary page. Sorry. Okay, good. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. So I want to go back to the investigations page. So this particular investigation was when the user clicked on the URL, and the system made a verdict and changed it to malicious. And after that verdict had been handed down, then the defender agent was told to produce an action that resolved this incident. And basically what it does is it remediates it by moving the email into a quarantine. So that's one example of automated investigations. Let me go back into my demo. And then there was another investigation that was made with no threats found. So there was a system executable found on the workstation that was renamed. And then the system did a scan and found that there was no threat there and closed the alert. So in addition to running responses on the impacted workstation, it can also do automated resolutions of alerts so that you're not constantly looking at alerts that have to be then manually resolved. And over time, you can tune your alerts and your alert handling so that the system becomes smarter and it can then automate some of these investigations much better. And you also have a way to put into the automated investigations different actions that you wish. So if you wanted to have an email sent out after the investigation had completed, you could trigger that with a Microsoft flow. So there's a lot of ways that you can integrate this with other Microsoft tools to get you the information that you need. Now, another thing I want to show you that's available in Plan 2 is advanced hunting. And this is where usually there's a dedicated team in the Security Operations Center, and their job is to look for the needle in the haystack. And we call that threat hunting, or in here in Defender, it's advanced hunting. And basically, this is a way to query and be proactive and look for things in this enormous database that has alert information or incident information or even just activity. So in the portal, we can review the options here. Over here, we've got the schema for hunting, and this will tell you about the types of things you can look for. You can look for alert evidence, email events, device information, threat and vulnerability information. You also then have queries, and this is where it takes a little getting used to the syntax, where you need to learn how to write a query to look through this data. Then we've also got detection rules that help you look for things that might exist in your environment specifically. So if you're looking for passwords that never expire, for example, you could set up that detection rule, and then you'll get alerts whenever it detects those things. But let's run a query from the shared query list. I'm going to go back to queries here. And we can click on shared queries over here to open that up. And the credentials were added to an Azure AD application query right here. We'll look for queries that detect incidents from our Cloud App Events table. The Cloud App Events table, you can find all audit data of Office 365 applications, including your Azure AD audit logs. So Azure AD audit logs provide traceability for all changes done by various features within Azure AD. Some of these audit logs include changes made to any resources within Azure AD, like adding or removing users, apps, groups, and so forth. And this first query will provide results of which users either added service principal credentials or updated an application certificate. So if you remember our story, I'll run the query. If you remember our story, that's what the attacker did, is they went in and impersonated the certificate and compromised our ADFS server. So this hunting technique uses a query to look for all activities that match our query criteria. So let's look at one of the users in the results. So we're going to pick one of these, and let's just pick any one of them. Just click this one here. And then it shows the details of that impacted result. So you can drill down and look at all the details of things that happened by the attacker, where it was logged, what port it used, which path it used to invoke the service host, and so forth. So it gets really, really detailed. And in order to properly run this, your security team, like I said, they need to understand the query language and how to find that needle in the haystack and look for activity and track down evidence above and beyond what the system would do for you automatically. Let me see if there's one other thing that we can do. There's an advanced script over here that shows us any OAuth apps reading mail via the Graph API. So again, when we talked about the storyline, the attacker authorized their own app and then used it to read the graph to read employees' emails. So if we run this query, then we'd see any OAuth apps that were reading mail. And you can see here, it shows a bunch of device registry events on the ADFS server. And if we scroll down even further, there's just a ton of information in here that supports the investigation. Just make sure I'm running this query as well. That was the old query, sorry. So if I bring that query, the new one, it looks for OAuth apps reading mail, and I'll run that query here. And it should show us, there we go. So here's the ID of the app that was registered within your Azure AD that was given rights to read mail And you can see each time that that app is logging in and providing access to the mail. So that's another thing that would show you details about how the attacker is moving around within your organization. And then lastly, if I run this query, where it's reading both Graph API and direct queries to the email, I don't find any results here. So that's good. But in the event somebody does start doing that, I can create a detection rule that will detect whenever these queries are met and then issue an alert for me. So if you understand the query language and how to find things, then you can go ahead and create your own detection rules in the future. So a common one would be, I want to know anytime a user is added to the domain admins group on-prem, or I want to know anytime a user is added to the global admins group in the cloud. And you could run that query and look for events that indicate that, and then set up detection rules to automatically generate an alert or an incident. All right, so that was pretty much it for the demo. This was supposed to be a high level to show you what you get in addition to Plan 1. And remember, Plan 1 is all about just antivirus. So there's patterns, detecting viruses, reporting back to your console. Plan 2 is about all the other activity that can't be detected by a pattern file. So you have to correlate these events, put them together, and make sense of them. And that's what Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 does for you. So some of the quick benefits here before we conclude. You get a rich and vast activity detection module for threat hunting. You get a single product to deploy. It's included in Microsoft 365 E5. If you already have that subscription, you already own Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. And you can combine with other Defender products like Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, and Defender for Cloud Apps to get that true defense in depth through the single investigation and alerting console. So those are some of the big benefits for moving up to Defender P2 if you don't have it today. There is a free trial that's available for Defender Endpoint. So contact us if you want to try the product for 30 days, or you could schedule a consultation with us to review how Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 can help you at your organization.